Hello, and welcome to this live stream presented by the IIT Bombay for Bharat Student Association. IIT Bombay for Bharat is an unofficial association of students and alumni of IIT Bombay who seek to understand and revive Indic civilizational values among themselves and to establish such values in the campus. Today, as part of the series of presentations and lectures on Indic civilizational values, today they are presenting on the topic of the contribution of Marathas to the Hindu polity in the history of India and their influence on the history of India. I am Pandurang Marathi. I'm an alumni of IIT Bombay, and today I'm joined by Swapnil Deshmukh, who is an expert on the history of Marathas and the governance structures, the polity of the Marathas. Hi, Swapnil. Hello. Thank you.
Hello, Pandurangji. Thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because a lot of things lined up.
Yes, it's an interesting topic, and it's something that not many people are aware of. I certainly was not aware of most of this, and it's also actually very relevant that people don't realize the contribution of the Marathas has been suppressed, or in fact all of real genuine Hindu history has been suppressed since the last 70 years, and more of this is coming out. It's eye-opening. It's amazing how much there is to be proud of. So it's good that we could discuss it and tap into your knowledge, Swapnil.
Thank you.
Okay. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. And
do you want to Swapnil, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and what led you to this and what you have done in this area?
Yes. So I'm an engineering MBA. I spent a lot of my career in banking technology. I did my MBA from IIM Lucknow and have been in this the software technology career for about 20 plus years, being CTO of organizations. And I never thought that I would actually delve into this field, right? Right? It's amazing. What happens is as you go through your career and through your MBA, you read about leadership, and as you go up the ladder, you get more into vision, organization structure, values of the organization, team building, right? And at the same time, a lot of things have been happening in the last decade. A lot of writers of Indian history have been coming out and writing a lot of things. For example, Sanjeev Sanyal, Meenakshi Jain, and a lot of other people to mention, right? And I started studying Shivaji from the perspective of what country are we really living in right now. So I realized that when I was in school, for example, a lot of stuff that was told to us about how long Shivaji ruled, what area he ruled, and then later on how long Marathas ruled was highly suppressed. And I stayed in Maharashtra, so
Yes.
we had right.
Yes, I must introduce. I'm from Pune. I went to school in Pune. I'm from the heartland of Maharashtra, and Swapnil is also went to university and school in Maharashtra. So we are Marathi, but still we did not know.
Right, and impact is really downplayed, and it's his identification with ancient Hindu scriptures and Hindu political ethos has been almost dug into the ground and covered. Right, he's been tried out. Some people came out saying Shivaji was a communist, Shivaji was a secular. So he's the whole inspiration behind and the foundation of the Maratha Empire, that is even further suppressed. So and then when I started researching into this, I found out a lot of stuff. So that's how.
Okay, let's jump into the topic. Let's share with our audience what we know, what we're going to talk about. So, first thing, let's discuss the title of this topic. We are talking about Marathas and the rise of Hindu polity. Now,
Right.
I consider myself to have pretty decent English knowledge, and to be honest, I had just a vague idea of what the word polity means. I had to look it up and understand very clearly what polity means. So now I understand why you use the word polity. Please explain what you mean.
Right. So if we can go to the first slide, that will help because we have a listing of uh, a quick a synopsis of what do we really mean by polity, right? So, if you see the Western polity, it is highly influenced uh, from its genesis from the Greek Empire and then the Roman Empire. So you have Plato, then you have Cicero, right? And then you have the Christian polity. So there is nothing like secular polity because as society evolves, they create culture and the way you rule, who gets to have a say on who rules, what is the art you follow, what is the source of your art, everything gets determined by the society you create, right? Unfortunately, we have been told, polity is secular polity. So we have been told that the Enlightenment period basically created the foundation of what we call as modern politics, right? Whether it is Rousseau, Voltaire, and then later we have James Mill and John Locke, and then all the writers of the French uh, freedom movement and American freedom movement, right? James Madison and all these people, that they are the ones who wrote the political theory. This is not true. I mean, just like in China, Confucius and all these are the inspiration behind their political theory. We have even older political theory, which starts right from the Aitreya Brahmanas, which are a part of the Vedas. So we can understand that what is really polity, right? It's the theory of the state. How do you conduct diplomacy? How do you handle conflict? It has uh, religious values built into it. All that we study as law, from which now we call law, it's actually based on canon law of Christianity. So there is no law which is secular law. All law is actually a carryover from what we know as Christian law.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, we are not taught all this, and thankfully, there are a lot of people who have written about it. And Jaiswal is one of the authors who has written some 500 pages work on just Hindu polity. So it involves cultural renaissance. It involves the place of temples and spiritual life in politics, in social life, in education, in commerce, and
Hmm.
your administrative
So,
system.
so if I were to summarize this, I would say that we are going to discuss polity, which is basically the framework of governance, framework of all political action and power, and in fact, a framework that determines how we live, the common people live their life, and how the rulers govern the common people. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's Hindu polity has not been seen in the modern world yet. What we know as what we call Ram Rajya, in fact, was the perfect example of Hindu governance, Hindu polity. And
Absolutely.
as I understand your topic, the topic today is how the Marathas revived and brought back the Hindu polity, the idea of Ram Rajya and Swaraj, and established these Hindu ideas in action is their first bullet point. And this is completely different. The Hindu ideas of governance are diametrically opposed to the Western Christian Greco-Roman ideas of governance. The Christian and Greco-Roman European ideas of governance are based around power, around material power and conquest, and very little given to commerce, civilizational, religious, aesthetics, and all, which just come by the way. Whereas my understanding is the Hindu governance pays a lot of attention to these aspects also. and we'll see how Shivaji and the Marathas brought back this and have preserved this for us. So
Yes.
let's see.
Yes.
Correct?
Absolutely. What you're saying is correct. Sorry, I just.
All right. So let's, now that it's clear what we're going to talk about, tell us in brief, Swapnil, the origin of the Marathas and up to the point of Shivaji, and then what Shivaji achieved after that.
Right. So what I would do is sorry.
So these are all the misconceptions that we are told about Marathas. Okay.
Right. These are some of the misconceptions, and this is the beginning of everything. What is the image of Shivaji? How long he ruled? For example, just to take one example, that people think that the Maratha Empire was a very small empire, which was very restricted to the Sahyadris. The reality is that it covered 70% of India, and for almost 100 years. Now, this is very shocking to many people. So, what I will do is that in the next few slides, I will quickly cover two very important points. Right.
So,
One
just
point-
as a reference for the audience, if the Maratha kingdoms ruled about 70% of India for more than 100 years, how long did the Mughals rule, and how much of India did they rule for that period?
So the Mughals officially kind of died out after 1707 when Aurangzeb died.
Yes.
After that, what you have is a few nobles.
But what was the
mainly-
maximum extent of the Mughal control of India? Where they had influence on the culture.
So it depends on the year you look at. By around 1707, Aurangzeb had conquered a lot of South India. So almost very close to entire India was under his dominion. But that was barely for a few years. After Aurangzeb dies, the Maratha resurgence starts, and in the next 20 odd years, they have already started conquering. In fact, by 1717 or so, the Marathas have surrounded Delhi, and they literally let the Mughal Emperor live, because it's if they kill the Mughal Emperor, then the rest of the Mughal polity would unite together to fight them. So they don't want to do that. So they want to erode the Mughal power slowly.
So, in real practical terms, the Mughals ruled about 80% of the country for barely 20 years, and then were in the later part of Aurangzeb's life. And
Yes.
other than that, they basically ruled less than 30-40% of India, which was mainly North.
Absolutely, and we'll see
That
some
was
maps.
that was mostly spent in fighting one another and fighting others and fighting for succession. And there was very little done in terms of culture and administration. So,
Absolutely. I mean, very, very little. There was no investment in any kind of public works. Everything was, it was the emperors and the nobles' treasure, more or less. So we will. I have a few maps later which give the extent of the Islamic rule, both the Mughal and the non-Mughal rule, which is the Adil Shahi and Qutub Shahi and all that, which gives the extent of the rule.
Okay.
So, right. So, all right. So, what we plan to do is have the presentation and the talk in kind of 4-5 sections. The left section is removing some misconceptions about who the Marathas were and what part of India they really ruled and when. Because most people think that Marathas means people who speak Marathi, or people who belong to today what is called as the state of Maharashtra, and we will see that how that is completely wrong, and how there are surprises. So we'll wait for that, right? And the next part, which is the larger part of the talk, is understanding how the political power which was amassed by the Marathas was then used by Shivaji himself first, and by later the Peshwas and the Confederacy of the Marathas all over India for a Hindu rejuvenation. Then how this rejuvenation did not die in 1820, but was always dormant, and it resurged back in 1857 War of Independence, and in the 1900s with Tilak, where pre-Gandhi independence movement was completely centered around the spirit of Shivaji, something again that we are never told in history, right? And this is going to be a huge surprise to many people. And then the last part is we will understand how the Shastra and the Shastra were used, because one of the reasons why the Maratha Empire survived and thrived, as well as what it tried to resurrect, is the Hindu polity, as we discussed. And they had a huge background in doing that, and they had used theoretical knowledge of Puranas and Vedas and everything. So we'll look a bit of what exactly all that was. Is that
Okay. Just one quick housekeeping comment here. For people who are watching and have some questions, you please feel free to send in your questions, and Swapnil and I will try to answer those questions at the end of our presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead, Swapnil.
All right. So the first question is, who are the Marathas? And like I said, many people think that Marathas are people who speak Marathi from this triangular area called Maharashtra today. Now, this is a reference from G.S. Sardesai, who was a Marathi historian, who one of the biggest historians of Marathas, and he wrote several books, some 9 volumes on Maratha history in Marathi, all around the end of 1900s, 1915. And this is his research, and this is what he says, that the word Marathas actually comes from the word Maharashtra, and the word Maharashtra comes right from 50 CE. We are talking of 50 CE, that is 50 years after Jesus Christ, right? So the word Maharashtra was not born much later, as people say, at the formation of the state. It comes from long time ago, and over time it got transmuted into Maratha, and then Maharatha and Maratha over time. And the whole foundation of this comes from the Vedas and the Mauryan period, actually. So in the Vedas, you would see that there are Rathas and Maharathas, who are basically generals, administrators of different kinds, right? So you have certain kingdoms who are not actually monarchy. There are different constitutions. They are either republican or they are a mixed monarchy. There are even constitutions where there are 2 kings. So there is a huge variety of constitutions as mentioned in the Vedas, and as also seen during the Mauryan period, the Buddhist period, and it is all seen in the works of the Buddhists and the Jains also. And what we call later the Marathas evolved from all these different kinds. So Satohanas, Mauryas, Bhojas, Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, Yadavas, Silahas, Kadambas, these are all different kingdoms who actually followed different kind of constitutions and have different kind of responsibilities. Now, as the Mauryan Empire breaks up, these people go in different areas of India where they are originally, where they conquer each other. And in this peninsular India, we have Satavahanas, which become Rashtrakutas, which become Chalukyas, and over time their name gets transmuted from Maharashtras to Marathas. And all this I'm saying, the Marathi language has not even evolved. So we will come to where the Marathi language evolves, but to give a quick hint, the Marathi language itself evolved somewhere around 1000 AD to 1300 AD. And it has its real rejuvenation or renaissance with Jnaneshwar in 1290. So we are talking about 1,000 years before Marathi ever came on the picture.
Yeah, you have a slide showing that, right?
Right. So I'll go to the next slide where it covers how it actually comes from the Aitareya Brahmanas, and a quick flash. And I put all this text not for audience to read, But nowadays, what happens is the people talk and they don't have any backing material or source material, and the audience is some people believe because they are politically affiliated, and some people don't believe because they are not politically affiliated. Right? But history is about facts. So I have presented these text extracts just to show that this is not a figment of my imagination or my political theory. There are people who have spent their entire lives doing research of the Vedas and the Brahmanas and have documented all this. So the modern linguistic identity that we have is a very recent occurrence. Our real identity actually comes from the Vedas, and languages have come, languages have gone. Marat, right? So if you see in the Aitreya Brahmana, Bhaujya is a kind of constitution. Later on, in the Mauryan era, Bhoja becomes a Rathika or a Rastrika, right? Now, as you go further, you have Satvats, which is the Satvahana period, who later on become Yadavas, which are also mentioned in the Vedas as a kind of Rathas, who follow the Bhoja constitution. And the Bhojas that you have later, which today we identify with the Bhoja community, technically they are simply the people who followed the Bhojat constitution during those periods. It has nothing to do with Gujarati language or Marathi language or whatever.
This is a very interesting point. It's a interesting contrast with the Western European idea of a nation. The European idea of a nation is very linguistic and race oriented. It's either people who speaking the language or belonging to a race, whereas the Hindu idea of a nation is not linguistic. It's you can have multiple languages in one kingdom. It's not race. It's because in India race was never considered. We didn't have anything with of the idea of race. The Hindu idea of a nation is based on its governance model, which is very interesting. So the Bhojas are those that follows the Bhojya constitution. The Satvahanas are following the Satvat constitution.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting.
the reason to cover this in the beginning is who we identify as influences our thinking.
Yes.
So, right. So once we understand that when we what we call Marathas are actually nothing but the Vedic people, the Mauryan people who went in different places at different points in time, and it has nothing to do with the language Marathi, which evolves much later.
Yeah, very important.
Fact, right. In fact, in 1290, when Jnaneshwar writes his magnum opus, Jnaneshwari in Marathi, at that time Shivaji's ancestors are not even in Maharashtra. Shivaji's ancestors come much later. He comes from the Sisodia dynasty of Rajputs, and they come much later from there into Maharashtra. So his ancestors are not even speaking Marathi, and so on. And we can go on. His wife Nimbalkars were actually Parmars from the Rajasthan.
Yeah.
So they were nowhere near at that time.
This is a wonderful insight. This gives you us modern Indians a wonderful insight that whether you live in Bundelkhand or in Dwarka or in Tanjore or in what's the place in Puri, we are all the same people. We all originated from one root. We are the same people, even though we may speak different languages. We may eat differently, but we are come from the same root. And it's easy to see this. Later on, you'll see it in one of your maps. For example, the Satvahana Empire is all of Deccan, and that covers people speaking what would be Marathi, Telugu, Kannada. The Chalukyas covered all of South India, people speaking Gujarati, Marathi, Telugu, Malayalam, Tamil. But there were one kingdom. So it wasn't linguistic based. It's very interesting.
Absolutely. So I'll again, just a small flash to cover what we already said. That this is on the left. You see the map, which is at the breaking of the Mauryan Empire, where the Mauryan Empire breaks up into Sunga Empire and Satavahan Empire. And you can see there is no Maharashtra here, there is no Marathi here. This even the language called Maharashtra is not yet developed here as yet, right? 50 CE has not yet happened here, right? These Satavahanas on the right side, you see again 100 years after this, 400 years after this, where now the Satavahanas have shrunk, right? The Cholas have emerged because they have kind of rebelled against the Satavahanas and formed their own identity, right? Then you go to 400 CE. This is again where consolidation happens, where the northern India consolidates under the Guptas and the southern India under Vakatakas. So if you see at this time, the language is called, in southern India, it's called Maharashtri. There is no Marathi yet, right? As you go further, all this again implodes. So in the northern India, the Guptas implode, and in the southern India, the Vakatakas implode. And you have the Chalukyas of Badami, which is the early Chalukyas, as we call it, coming on the scene. Again, the language here is Maharashtri. Then you have some consolidation. Rashtrakutas come into place. They defeat the Chalukyas. They conquer. Now, it is only after this, if you see, again, the Rashtrakutas are defeated by the Chalukyas. At this point, you really have something called as Marathi kind of getting formed, because this is the point where poets like Rajashekhar write their first work in Maharashtra, and from here Maharashtra starts getting slowly modified into what today we can identify as Marathi from Prakrut Maharashtra, right? And this is the Yadavas period. So this is when Jnaneshwar writes his magnum opus in Marathi, and you can see that during all this time, the official language of all the southern peninsula, including what you today would call the state of Maharashtra, is actually Sanskrit and Kannada. So you hardly find anything written in Marathi at this stage, and yet Yadavas are the ancestors of Jadavs, which is the dynasty of Jijabai, who is the mother of Shivaji, right? And the Yadavas have come from North India. They are the Rathas from North India. So what we see is that language is really a huge flexible. It is not really something that you identify with. It is only later that probably with the formation of the states or a little before that people started identifying themselves as, I'm a Bengali, I'm a Tamilian, I'm a Telugu, I'm a Marathi, I'm a Gujarati. It is all fake. The reality is that India has always been multilingual. Right? For example, in the age of Krishnadevaraya, you have Tenali Raman, who is there writing in Telugu. And what does he write about? He is writing about Pandurang. So your namesake. So Pandurang is in Pandharpur, and his claim to fame is actually not all the stories that we hear of Tenali Raman, which are fine and people made into a pop culture. But the reason he is one of the 9 jewels in Krishnadevaraya's court is because he writes a huge magnum opus in Telugu on Pandurang of Pandharpur. So, right. So this is something I'm just cover. What I already said, I'm just it's very quickly highlighting that.
Okay, so so just summarizing. So we know that the word Maratha and Maharashtra has almost nothing to do with the modern British created province of Maharashtra or Marathi. It is a continuation of one of the languages of the civilization that was originally all over India, and it is still all over India. We are all one civilization. And so absolutely. The word Marathas, if it wasn't, Marathas was another power like Satavahanas and Chalukyas. And fortunately, Shivaji was born as a Maratha, and he stopped the Muslims from basically breaking up the Vedic civilization.
Absolutely. Right. So I'll not delve on this slide. This just is just to emphasize the point that just one point, that the oldest inscriptions that we find in Marathi, or what is we can identify in Marathi, they are not even in the state of Maharashtra today. They are in Mysore. So you can understand how multilingual the whole nation is and how languages flow. Languages are not really regions as we today kind of think. right? And these are some of the references of some people who have done amazing work on this. Rajwade, who wrote 22 volumes on just sources of history of Marathas,
Oh my God.
and G.S.
22 volumes.
Sardesai. Absolutely, and these people have done amazing work, and you have volumes and volumes of just letters and letters and letters and farmans written by people. So this is not a figment of imagination. These people have done their lifetime's work, and
Amazing.
all this is open to challenge. But at least one should study before challenging what these people have done, rather than having a political bias. Anyway, right? So. I'll move on to the next part, which will cover very quickly a little bit of history of the Maratha. I think in barely 5-7 minutes, we already covered a lot of time, I think. So I'll cover this to the basic point being that you cannot have cultural rejuvenation till you have a political authority over the lands that you govern. Like Chanakya says, dharmasya moolam artha, right? And sukhasya moolam dharma. So for sukha, you have to establish dharma. And for dharma, you need artha, you need control over your land. Right? And a lot of wrong things have been said about was the real extent of the Maratha Empire. And once we see the extent of the Maratha Empire, then we can see what Marathas really did in those areas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'll just go ahead with these slides very quickly. Right? Right? So on the left side, you see the map in 1650, and you can see there are no Marathas. There is whole Adil Shahi, and Shivaji has one Jagir in Pune from his father there, and this is where it all starts, right? And this is the overall timeline. The left dotted box is the timeline till Shivaji's death, right? So that is where Sambhaji becomes the Chatrapati at the age of 25. And you can see the extent of Shivaji's empire in the map below, right? And but you can see that the overall timeline is pretty large, and you can see the maps on the top, which is that in 1759, you see this whole area is under Maratha control. And for people who say that, but then immediately Panipat happened and the Marathas died after Panipat. Well, here is the map in 1820. Right, 1805, and which then starts reducing to 1820. That's the rightmost map, and you still see that the whole yellow area that you see, it is all Maratha.
Yeah, so the Maratha kingdom actually expanded after the war Panipat battle.
Absolutely, it expanded.
So we've been told, and Panipat battle has been glorified by the winners of that one battle, as if that mattered in the history. It did not matter.
Right. Panipat battle, absolutely. Panipat and Haldigati, both battles have been glorified on the side of the attackers. It's like if somebody comes to your housing society to conquer your apartment, and you resist the person at the gate, and the person goes away, and you lose soldiers, but you still retain control over your society. How is it that you have lost? I don't understand. Right?
Yeah.
So, which is exactly how both the Haldigati and the Panipat battle have been wrongly projected, as if the Mughals won or the Abdali won, when in reality they had to go back; they couldn't stay. Right?
This is a very good slide. The timeline. It shows, for example, from around 1700, when Aurangzeb was declining and died, until about 1800, the Marathas ruled, as you said, up to 70% or more of the country. In fact, they had defeated almost all the Islamic rulers. Only in the 1800s, 1820, it was the British on the right-hand side, the pink on the right, that was not Maratha. So all of India was under Maratha rule. Now here I want to bring in one point, which these days in social media, or not social media, but in history that we are taught. There is a famous quote or attributed to Jinnah, which says that when they were discussing the partition of India with the British, Jinnah said to the British that the British, you got the India from the Muslims, you must give it back to the Muslims. But let's say Swapnil's map here says, where are the Muslims in that map? Nowhere.
Absolutely.
The rest of
No,
India, other than the British, is Maratha.
absolutely.
And even I remember the history taught in my year six or something. The final conquest the British had to make, which set them as the rulers of India, was the treaty with the Marathas in 1820, not a treaty with any Mughal king or any Muslim king. So
Absolutely.
this is,
Mughals are irrelevant for a very long time,
yeah.
decades.
So Jinnah was completely wrong. Jinnah was misinformed or deliberately lying, and we've been taught that lie all throughout.
Absolutely.
And today's a lot of today's uh, people believe that, still happen to believe that, which is good to show them the real history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
Okay.
And right. So this is a very quick. Something that is not discussed is how did the Marathas really survive, because there is been this crisis period which is not discussed after the death of Shivaji till the death of Aurangzeb, which is a period of 27 years. And when we talk of Hindavi Swaraj, this is where the values of Shivaji really come into the picture, because Shivaji's son Sambhaji becomes the king when he's 25. Then he dies in 9 years. His second son becomes the king when he's 19. He again dies in 10 years. Then his daughter-in-law, Rajaram's wife, becomes queen for 7 years.
Tarabai.
And right, and then there is a civil war for another 5-7 years. So this about a 30-year period is a major crisis period post Shivaji's death. And the reason everything survives in spite of that is surely the values that Shivaji inculcated and his vision of Hindavi Swaraj, because of which his polity does not dissolve into just imperialist tendencies. They know what they are fighting for, that they are not fighting for an empire. What they're fighting for is for a free Bharat. And this enables them to really make humongous sacrifices. So,
Yeah. Very,
it's on
yeah,
the
very important.
right
It's,
slide. If you see in 1707, all that the Marathas have are just the forts, and they're really fighting from the forts. The Rajaram is not even able to collect any revenue from the areas that he governs. Right. So this is the dotted area. That's the crisis period that I was talking about, which is often not discussed. And in 1759, this is what is achieved, what Shivaji's dream, that Maratha Empire, Hindavi Swaraj should be from Attak to Cuttack, and his famous statement that my horses will drink the waters of Sindhu Nadi in the west and Kaveri in the east, right? Which is exactly what the Marathas achieved at this time, and continuously take it further. And as you see that Mughals are not there. So why are
yeah,
this told this fake story is basically the British propagated this fake story everywhere. And in fact, one of the first biographies that is written on Shivaji is actually English biography by the British. There are Sanskrit biographies and in Braja by Kavi Bhushan here, but the first English biography is written by James Duff. And the reason he writes this biography is that he wonders that if British conquered from the Mughals, how come in the history of the British, everybody that the British are fighting is a Maratha? So what story is this? And that is when he starts researching and figures out that it's a complete fake news. So, yeah.
okay.
So that brings us uh, to making basically 2 points: the identity of the Marathas, and second is the real extent of the political rule of Marathas, which is very essential for establishing dharma, which is a fundamental objective of the Maratha Empire, Shivaji Empire. What Shivaji keeps on saying, that he wants to establish Maharashtra Dharma. And here, when he says Maharashtra Dharma, he's not talking of the state of Maharashtra, which gets created in 1960s. He's talking of the Maharashtra of the Mauryan era and the Vedic era. That's what he's really referring to.
So now we are going to talk about the Sukhasya Mula Dharma. We just now covered Dharma's Artha. That is, so we now have power. Marathas have now got power, and we will see how they employed their power to rejuvenate Hindu culture.
Absolutely. And it was essential to show their geographical extent, because unless you evidence a geographical extent, it is very difficult to convince somebody sitting in Indore or Tanjavore or Gujarat about the influence of the Maratha Empire on in that state and in the Hindu, and why they basically still are Hindu. For example, Gujarat was completely Islamic. The reason Gujarat today is a Hindu is because of the Dabhades and the Gaikwads, which the Peshwa sent and they conquered. And you had the Maratha empires of Baroda run by the Gaikwads later for centuries, which rejuvenated Hindu civilization in Gujarat. Otherwise, Gujarat would have been nothing but like Hyderabad, where
So did
more
they
Islamists.
did they reconvert the Muslim population of Gujarat back to Hinduism, or have some sort of Ghar Wapsi?
Not that I know of. So they did not reconvert. Reconversion was open to voluntary, because neither Shivaji nor the Marathas believed in forced conversions. So
Yes.
conversion to Hinduism was left to voluntary changes, which
Yes.
did happen. So which did happen, but it was left to voluntary.
Yeah, I have read the history of the Hindus, and this is one of the key points that stands out. Every other religion, major religion in the world, every other religion, you talk from Islam, Christianity, or even minor religions like Jewish, they all spread by the sword, by power. Hinduism is the only religion that spread by example, no force, voluntary. People join them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'll proceed with this part. So I purposely kept the slide on Shivaji at the last to show how Shivaji's actions actually inspired everything that we're talking here. So this is what the Maratha Empire did. One crisis which faced northern India especially was that 70% of India had lost their ruling class completely. Right? You did not have an administrative class. So you really had to go and replace it from people here. And this is where we see the Gaikwads, the Scindias, the Holkars, Pawars, Bhosles go in different areas. And wherever you had political class left, like the Sikhs in Punjab or the Rajputs, the Marathas did not really seek to displace them. They did go and resolve some succession disputes here and there, but they were not in the business of creating an imperialist concept of a single monarchy ruled by some Peshwa sitting in Pune. They did not believe that. They sincerely were interested in Hindawi Swaraj, and they did not displace wherever there were already Hindu kings. And which is why you will see that the Rajput kings, the Kannadiga kings, the Bundelas and the Jhansi, they were all freed. They did owe their allegiance to the Marathas, and the Marathas did collect chauth from them, taxes from them. However, none of their administration was interfered with. So what we see, the cultural renaissance that we see as what started by Marathas, is by first seeding this garden, right? And some of the examples is, the biggest example is Ahilyabai Holkar. So now this is post Panipat. Panipat happens before this. So Ahilyabai comes to power post Panipat, and this is what she does. She issues coins with Shivalinga, Surya, Chandra in Devanagari script. She creates so many temples and dharamshalas and ghats, and you can see the whole map here. And
I think it would be important to point out where Ahilyabai Holkar where was the kingdom, and
right.
the fact is that it was after Panipat. And what were in all these changes that she made? What was the situation before she made the changes?
Right. So if you see, Indore is in the Malwa area. So
Yeah, some of almost central India.
Central India, a little northern Madhya Pradesh is what we would call it today. So this is where Indore is. And
Yeah,
just
so it's
below
it's not.
Kashi and Aten.
It's not what we today think of as Maharashtra.
Yeah, it is it is not at all. In fact, it's more near Delhi than anywhere near Pune.
Yes.
So it's really, really far, right? And the situation at this time was the Islamic empires everywhere across India had destroyed temples. The whole temple culture had gone down. The dharamshala did not exist. The ghats did not exist. The artisan economy had completely gone down because no temples were being constructed, no murtis were being built, no great pujas were being done. The pilgrims, we have a concept of Char Dham Yatra and Yatra to Kashi and Tirupati and Somnath, and all these yatras were fraught with danger from the Mughals and the Muslim kings themselves. And what Ahilyabai did is she rejuvenated everything and gave protection to all these people wherever. And of course, rest of the areas also there were Marathas by now. So from a time where you needed an army to go with pilgrims so that they could go to Kashi, now people could actually go very freely. And this started a huge economy. Temples were divested of their lands. Traditionally in Bharat, the way temples and the economy of the temples operates is that temples have their own land. And this is to make the temple economy independent of the ruler, even if he's a Hindu ruler. So nobody can take anything away from the temple. So the income of that land and the produce of that land is the ownership of the temple. And all the bhog and the prasad and the charity work that happens in the temple happens out of the revenue that is earned from the land that is under the name of the temple. So this entire economy gets devastated once you destroy a temple. It is, and the whole land is taken away by the emperor or the sultan or whoever. So it's a massive damage. And she resurrected all this, and she created much more. She sponsored Sanskrit and Marathi literature, and she started the practice of sending the waters of Ganga to all the different places where Shivalayas are there. And she started what today we call as Maheshwar textiles, again giving a huge boost to the traditional textile industry. So, and the more said, how much can you say? Because this is all the list of temples that she resurrected, right? So it's a massive list, and the less, not enough work has been done on the Holkars and what Ahilyabai did, because she did probably for this region what Krishnadeva did for southern India in his times, right? And
The Ahilyabai Holkar is should get a lot more recognition in history than we currently give her. She was also very forward-looking. She was the first in her kingdom. Was the first to encourage girls to study, to education of girls. This was back in the 1700s, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
even today, some in the Western countries are still fighting for that.
Absolutely, way forward looking.
Yeah, this the idea of feminism, which is in the Western culture, they're still fighting for their rights. And here was Ahilyabai Holkar giving rights to them without somebody fighting for it. She could see the benefit and it was just the right thing to do. She did that.
Right. It
Amazing.
was just the right thing to do. I think that you said it. It was just the right thing to do, and this shows that they really understood what they had lost, and they had studied the Puranas and our Itihasas very well to understand what has been lost.
Yeah.
So, right. Then you have the Bhosles of Nagpur, right? Today we see Rath Yatra at Jagannath Puri, but for 150 years the entire system was broken. The murti was running from here to there, taken by the pilgrims, right? And when the Bhosles of Nagpur, they went and so they were attacking Bengal, and when they conquered Puri, they rejuvenated the whole thing. So today, what you see, Puri is actually the Puri created by the Bhosles of Nagpur. So they donated a huge amount of land, like I said, to finance the whole temple economy, right? They invited lots of private land donations and in money and cash and gold, which a lot of merchants gave a lot of land to again finance the Puri Mandir. They gave protection to the pilgrimages that were happening there vis-a-vis the fear with which people lived there. And they restarted the Rath Yatra, and they are the ones who started the Jhulana in Puri. So whatever you see Jagannath Puri today is because of the rejuvenation by the Bhosles of Nagpur. So, something that really escapes mention in many places, right? Then you have the Bhosles of Tanjavore. So the entire Tanjavore culture, you see, it's a continuation from Cholas to later to the Bhosles of Tanjavore. And so Bhosles of Tanjavore are the stepbrother of Shivaji, Ekoji or Venkoji also as he's called. He took over Tanjavore after the demise of the Adil Shahi, the Bijapur Empire, and we'll get into what exactly happened and why when we discuss the slide on Shivaji. But his descendants, Sarfoji especially, continue to accumulate a lot of Sanskrit and Telugu literature. A lot of new Sanskrit and Telugu literature was created in his time. The Saraswati library established by the Cholas was grown further and further. Today, the Tanjavore music that you see is an amalgamation of Karnataka and Hindustani music. And these are the rulers who invited musicians and singers from all over the place. Bharatnatyam was encouraged and the new stuff was created by 4 dance exponents who again were invited in Tanjavore. So there was a very, very conscious effort by generations of Bhosles of Tanjavore to create this culture. And if you see, there is no Marathi here. You see, the Bhosles of Bhosles are Marathi-speaking people, Marathas, and they go to Tanjavore, and what they're encouraging is Telugu and Sanskrit literature, not Marathi literature. Right? And today
that's a very good point, Swapnil. This goes back to what you explained earlier, that kingdoms in the nation state in Hindu, what was that framework, polity,
yes,
are not linguistic based. They are based on the way of conducting themselves, which is based on our Vedas and Aitreya Brahmanas. And the king goes there, he adopts the local customs and the local language, but the ruling framework is the same as that our ancestors set up.
absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely. And you see this everywhere. You see this in Gwalior, you see this in Baroda. Marathi has not overridden Gujarat. So Gujarat people still speak Gujarati.
Yes.
Right? In Gwalior, everybody does not speak Marathi. They still speak the local languages. Right?
Yes.
So the huge impetus to people really understood what Hindu polity is at those times. Right? And Dabhades and Gaikwads of Baroda, where Sayajirao Gaikwad is singularly responsible for some huge history work, right from the Vedas. His Baroda Oriental Library has thousands and thousands of manuscripts which he collected because he did not want our history to be lost. And a lot of work done by people, including the one done by G.S. Sardesai, is based on the manuscripts that the Gaikwads have collected. Sardesai was actually a tutor to the princes, the sons of Sayajirao Gaikwad. And sitting there, he wrote his magnum opus on the Marathas.
So these Gaikwads, especially Sayajirao Gaikwad, are very recent. They were active. He was active and doing all this great work, preserving and growing Hindu culture right into the 1900s. And
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
today, the Gaikwads of Baroda are held in very high esteem.
Absolutely. He is also the one who sponsored Vivekanand for a long time. And so they have done a lot of work for the Hindu polity, Hindu culture, Hindu astha, and Hindu religion or spirituality, as we call it. Right? Then the Shindes of Gwalior, again, we could go on and on what they had done. Right? So the moment Maharji Shinde has Shah Alam under his thumb, the first thing he does is get this done. And of course, then there are a lot of other reforms which are Hindu-oriented reforms, which he gets Shah Alam to do. So a lot of work done by the Shindes of Gwalior. Right? And all this is inspired by Shivaji. Now you will notice that I have not put a slide on Peshwas because the Peshwas were again doing so much, though their domain they had kept restricted. It was a confederacy, so their domain was restricted around Pune and Maharashtra. But again, they have done so much here. It just, I mean, we will again put slides and slides on the Peshwas, right? But people kind of realize, what Nana Fadnavis did and what Madharao Peshwa did and what Nana Sahib Peshwa did. People understand that Peshwas have been the rulers of this area, and so obviously they would do a lot in this area. But my focus was to show that it is not just restricted to this area; it spreads all around India. And
Yeah, the influence of the influence that of the Marathas on all of India. In fact, I think we have to think of a new term for the Maratha dynasty, because the modern word of Marathas and Maharashtra tend to make people think only of the Western Ghats and Sahyadri Mountains. Whereas I think we need another word to show the Maratha influence extended all the way across the whole country.
Yes, and that the identification with Marathi language is actually much recent. The real Marathas means all of us are Marathas actually, because we all come from that same crop of Mauryan and the
Rathas. We are Maharathas.
Maharathas. We are all. That's a good word to keep on saying, that it is Maharathas. So Maharathas. So
yes.
Right,
at this point, Swapnil, I think it might be good to tell the audience where do we think Shivaji got his ideas and his inspiration and maybe his goal of establishing Hindavi Swaraj. Yeah, there's some anecdotal evidence, or I don't know if there's any historical evidence. You tell us.
Yes. So when Shivaji was a teenager, he went to the south where Shahaji was conquering Karnataka for the Bijapur Empire. And remember, at that time, the Vijayanagar Empire, hardly 50 odd years had passed since Vijayanagar Empire demise, and his descendants were still fighting. So descendants were not out; they were still fighting. The empire had gone. The descendants were still there. The capital city was destroyed. However, when the empire, the emperorship kind of went away of the descendants of Krishnadev Raya, what happened is that the confederacy of Nayaks did not get dissolved. So basically, the Bahmani sultans who went and conquered, they did not actually gain a lot of land from where to earn revenue, because they destroyed the capital, they destroyed the dynasty of Krishnadev Raya. But the Nayaks still existed, right? And that was what Shahaji was conquering for Adil Shah. And Shivaji went in south and Bengaluru, and he saw what a land where the Islamist empire has not really gathered its feet and rooted itself really looks like. And he saw the culture and he saw the ethos, and he realized that this is something very different from the Adil side it is living in, right? So
he lived in that area, the Bijapur, Bengaluru area, for how many years? Some years, right?
Yeah,
5 or 6
and
years.
he was visiting. He was a teenager. There is a debate how much, at what age did he really go, and how long did he stay.
So until then,
very clear about his influence.
Yeah, until then he had not seen the Hindavi form of governance anywhere. He had been brought up in the Adil Shahi, and when he saw the Krishnadev Raya's kingdom, where the governance and the people still living according to the Hindavi or Vedic principles, it opened his eyes.
Yes, it opened his eyes, and of course, there are a lot of mentorship from the Daduji Kondev and other teachers that he had, and the Brahmin and other CKP advisors that Shahaji had. So I'll come in the next slides where I will demonstrate that why Jaiswal says that Shivaji Swaraj was Hindavi Swaraj, and the reason is throughout all this period where there was a suppression in the Deccan area, the Brahmins and all the other people, they had actually conserved the Puranas, and they had continued to write political commentary based on Mahabharata and Ramayana and the Vedas. So this consciousness of power and governance and Arthashastra through Sukraniti and everything, it still remained with this educated class of people, and it was not let go. So I will come to the slides to evidence that this also played a huge part in this, right? So before I move to that, just one slide on what Shivaji himself did, because many people say Shivaji was secular and all that. So I just want to cover that Shivaji was tolerant of religions who were tolerant of Hinduism, to put it very frankly. He, in fact, among the mentors of Shivaji and who he looked at as spiritual gurus, there are a lot of Hindu gurus like Tukaram and Ramdas, and there were two Sufi saints also. I actually visited Dargah of one of the saints at Keshi in Konkan. However, he was very clear that its tolerance is very important, and without tolerance, it's not the same. So, Shivaji considered Vedanta to be like the philosophy of Hinduism, and wherever something like Sufism, there are some Sufi saints whose philosophy, at least what they espoused, the kind of they spoke what Vedantas said. He was tolerant, but the moment anything became intolerant of Hinduism, he did not hesitate to cut it down. So, for example, we know that when Afzal Khan came and attacked Shivaji, we know the letter which Adil Shah wrote to Afzal Khan. And it is very clear from the letter that Adil Shah writes that Shivaji has conquered Bhiwandi and Kalyan, and he has harassed the Muslims there because the Muslims were doing a lot of forced conversions. And all the forced conversion activity in Bhiwandi and Kalyan has halted because Shivaji has taken charge of the masjids and converted them into granaries. And for this, he must be killed. It's very clear, and all letters and letters are being produced on the book on the right, which I'm mentioning, right, by Bhaskar Mennade, produces these letters in English, though the original books are in Marathi. This book is 1,300 pages of letters and letters, which talk about all this. Shivaji also established Sanskrit-based administrative vocabulary. At that time, the entire vocabulary was in Farsi, and he created a Sanskrit Rajkosh, right? He also stopped all grants to masjids that were happening before in the Adil Shah territory when he conquered it, and started sponsoring mandirs. But the masjids have to survive for themselves, because he said this is not a native religion. If you want to bring an external religion, you have to do it on your own money. You cannot expect the grants from this government. This is a Hindu government. Islam is not a native religion here.
This is such a basic common sense idea in a country like Bharat. We are a Hindu country, and
Right.
today's government, although they are dealing with the legacy of the last 70 years, but this is something they should do it immediately, because Shivaji did this when he had just started winning one or two small areas, but from the beginning he showed that this is the limit.
Yes.
There will be no forced conversions, there will be no destroying of mandirs, and if you do not tolerate us, we do not tolerate you.
Absolutely.
That is the way it should. I need no state sponsoring of a religion or of a culture whose aim is to destroy us.
Absolutely.
That is crazy.
So he was very clear. If you want respect, you give respect. And he was very clear on reclamation of destroyed mandirs. Right. Today we talk about Mathura and Kashi and Ram Janmabhoomi. He was very clear that wherever he went, where there were large mandirs which were destroyed and converted into masjids. Usually, mandirs, when they destroy, the pillars and everything is kept same, and a dome is put and it's converted into a masjid by removing the murtis. So Shivaji restored all those masjids back into mandirs. No debate about it. He was absolutely clear about this, that if your aggression will be reversed, there is no doubt. Right. So mutual tolerance has to be there, mutual respect has to be there. Only then everything works. If you are going to aggress, it's going to be stopped. It's going to be stopped very violently. Very clear. Right. And it's very clear, the last point in the letters that he wrote to Venkoji, where Venkoji is still considering himself to be a servant of Bijapur, and at that time Bijapur is not ruled by the descendants of Adil Shah; it's ruled by the Pathan Ballol Khan, who is a rabid Islamist. And Shivaji is very clear, and he conquers all Tanjavore. He takes away all rights of Venkoji to rule Tanjavore any further, and gives half of Tanjavore to his Venkoji's wife Deepabai, and says that you can give to whoever you want. And then the Tanjavore itself has to go to Venkoji's descendants. And the condition he puts that as long as no Muslim emperor, Muslim ruler is given power in Tanjavore, if a Muslim emperor is given power, he will come. The Marathas will come and take it back. It's very, very clear. And this is clause 6 of the agreement with Venkoji, actually. So his ideas about this are
very clear. Let there be no misconception. What was Shivaji's thinking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
So now we're coming into the effect of the Maratha legacy on the Bharatiya independence movement, the nationalistic movement after Shivaji and after the Marathas.
Yes. So I think we have completed 1 hour, but I'll try to cover this as fast as possible. And if it is not enough, then I will very surely handle it in the Q&A time that we have. Right. This is about this last square that we're talking about. In 1820, technically the Maratha Empire has ended, but everything hasn't ended. You see, there are 2 things that happen. One is in 1857, you have the uprising. Now, if you see Lakshmi Bai, we talk about Lakshmi Bai from Jhansi, and of course,
Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi.
Yes,
Jhansi ki Rani.
Jhansi ki Rani. Who is ruling in Jhansi? The Nevalkar, the Marathas are the administrators of Jhansi, right? And Lakshmi Bai's previous name is Manikarnika Tambe, and she is a daughter of one of the advisors to Bajirao II, who is banished to live in Kanpur. He is told never to come near Pune after the 1820 last war in which the Marathas lose to the British. And she is the one who is married to Nevalkars. So, along with her, who are the other rebels? Tatya Tope. So this is all again that Maratha political base, which has been shut down. It is coming up again, and some, because of their political reasons, cannot cooperate. For example, right? I won't take names here, but some cannot cooperate. The old confederacies, and some actually participate in the war for independence. So this is again the Hindu Swarajya spirit rising here, which the British hid, and they said, oh, it was some sepoy uprising. Nonsense. It was a complete, it was a Hindavi movement for Swaraj which came.
Yeah, the spark that Shivaji, the seed that Shivaji laid of Hindavi Swaraj. This is the long timeline shows how strong it is, how deeply embedded it is, and in fact, it is even going on today. You and I are talking about it.
Absolutely. And the resurgence in 1896, I will discuss more on that in more detail, because this is the part of history that is really hidden from us. The resurgence with Tilak, right? So I'm just referring that, again, this is not a figment of my imagination. This is a book written by Anil Samarth in 1975, sitting in Shantiniketan in Bengal, right? And here he talks about Shivaji and the Indian national movement. And so I will talk about the Indian national movement in 1896 and ahead, where you see this, it is not clearly communicated as what happened before Gandhi. And the reality is that from 1896 onwards, till the death of Tilak, and even a couple of decades after that, the entire nationalistic movement is actually Shivaji consciousness. Now, I know some of these people are going to be, not believing, so I would encourage them to go and read the book with which has evidences, letters, quotes, everything. So I will only summarize here, right? So we know that Tilak started Ganesh Jayanti, public celebration of Ganpati. What is not often spoken of, that he also started Shiva Jayanti in a public way in 1896, right? And this was later on shut down by the British, and we will see how it was shut down, right? In here, Tilak was basically accused that he provoked Chafekar brothers, right, by stating in a speech and in writings that Shivaji killing Afzal Khan was justified. That's it. He didn't do anything more. That's it. Right? Chafekar brothers said in jail after being imprisoned that they were inspired by Shivaji, and they were inspired by Shivaji's killing of Afzal Khan when they killed Rand in Pune. And lo and behold, the British realized that something is afoot, that this is a very dangerous trend. And that is the primary reason why first time Tilak goes to jail for carrying an article which basically says that Shivaji killing Afzal Khan is a justified thing, right? And immediately you see a complete cut down on the word Shivaji in all media at that time, right? Several newspapers are prosecuted just for carrying the word Shivaji. Times of India, which is of course a British-owned newspaper at that time, is fighting against Shivaji consciousness, creating a Brahmin, non-Brahmin divide, creating Hindu-Muslim antagonism. There is a major this thing on any mention of Shivaji at that time. 1906, Morley Minto has expressed in letters between themselves that Shivaji emerging as a national hero is a very, very dangerous thing, right? Because he said Swaraj is my birthright.
So who was Morley Minto?
Morley Minto reforms were happened around 1905, 1906, where separate electorates were given based on religion and all. Right? So it was a very divisive reform. And partition of Bengal and all that kind of stuff. First partition, which was then reversed later again. Right? So here these guys are following divide and rule policy. And here Tilak, everywhere where Tilak goes and says Swaraj is my birthright, he's telling stories about Shivaji. We are not told that this is what Tilak was actually doing. That everywhere Tilak was going, his main hero, which he projected all the way till his death, was actually Shivaji. And not only Tilak, even Firoz Shah Mehta, Annie Besant, these are Indian National Congress people, right? They all are talking about Shivaji, right? And you can see the years of their writings and all. And Tilak, of course, differed with them in the saying that Tilak said political independence before social reforms, right? Even after the death of Tilak, you have the Marathi theatre taking up the mantle in a huge way, where you can see dramas on Shivaji, natak and natak upon natak, Sangeet natak upon Sangeet natak happening till 1937. So till 1937, there is a Shivaji consciousness that is maintained. But of course, then later it kind of fizzles out in the main political discourse. But Shivaji still remains and is hugely responsible for the revolutionary national movement that happened. Because as I will show you that the two main centers of revolutionary movement were Maharashtra, Bengal, also Punjab, Lala Lajpat Rai, and southern area. So this is where we see, right? You see, right in 1857, you have Shivaji literature being written by Bengali writers, right? And it just goes on and on and on. You have Surendranath Banerjee writing, right? Sakharam Devskar, who is a Maharashtrian born in Raigad, he is writing prolifically in Bengali works upon Shivaji, because he has a disciple who is a Bengali, who is impressed and who considers that Shivaji can be a national hero, and who takes the books to Bengal, right? You have Tagore who has written, Aurobindo who has written, Bipin Chandra Pal who has written profusely on Shivaji, praising Shivaji. The entire national consciousness that you have in those times is actually Shivaji consciousness. This has been hidden from us, right? Lala Lajpat Rai writes in Urdu on Shivaji, so you can imagine what's happening here. right? The Maharaja Bardwan expresses worry about Shivaji's tomb. Bardwan, where is Bardwan? Bardwan is in Bengal, right? So Shivaji changes the entire political philosophy in Bengal in this period. Right?
That's the influence. So that's the influence of Shivaji and the Marathas,
Yeah,
ongoing on the
on
on
the
Hindu culture and then Hindu nationalism.
absolutely, and this is largely hidden. You know, we the pre-Gandhian history, we are not told about these things, right?
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
last so the last section is about Hindavi Swaraj and how the Shastra and the Shastra combine together. You are asking about the influence of Shivaji, and one of the huge influence, or rather the land on which Shivaji, the fabric on which Shivaji worked further, was the emancipation of the Hindus in the Sahyadris, which started from the Manabhava sects in 1200s, then with Jnaneshwar and Ramdas, where what basically happened is that Hindu religion, which was restricted in the language of Sanskrit till that time, right, and it was only ritualistic otherwise, became more philosophical, became more bhakti oriented, and these saints brought the deepest of the philosophies from the Vedas and the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the common man on the street in Maharashtra. Uh, this led to the spiritual emancipation of Hindus and a consciousness in the Hindus as to who they really are, where their ancestry comes from, what are their values, what is their society, what is their aspiration in life, what is their life concept, the concept of moksha and dharma in their life. Gradually, this gets into an desire for political independence and political assertion, and they really understand what are they really fighting for. So after Samadhi of Jnaneshwar, in the next 50-60 years, you have about 100 very, very famous saints which are very well known, right? From Namdev to Ekanath to Gora Kumbhar to Narhari Sonar, and so many saints that you hear who sang in Marathi, wrote in Marathi. These created a huge awareness about Hinduism and Hindu thought and Hindu philosophy in the people in this region, which gave them an identity and told them what they have lost, and what, when they fight for Shivaji, what are they really dying for? They are not just dying for some land, they are not just dying for some political participation or home rule kind of thing. They are literally dying for the soul of this land, the Atma of this land. And this is the fabric that Shivaji worked on, right? Then further in this book, we find out what was the Shastras on which was the foundation of Shivaji's acumen, intelligence, and the people around him. What were they really educated in, right? This is a very interesting extract from that. Basically, what it says that in this area, you still had people who were educated in Mahabharata, in Shukraniti, who understood the politics, the political literature, who understood Arthashastra literature, who read it, propagated it generation to generation. And when Shivaji comes, you see all this coming. For example, Shivaji does not believe in one man rule. He actually appoints an Ashtapradhan Mandal, which actually rules in his place when he's everywhere. So it is not just his one man decision, and Ashtapradhan Mandal can actually overrule him. The Peshwa can overrule Shivaji. That's a massive, massive change, right? He has a parishad where all these discussions are made. They don't have what is Paura Janpad or what is called as today Lok Sabha kind of thing. They have more of a Rajya Sabha kind of thing, right? And like we discussed, the influence of Vijayanagar. Just to go further, on the right side, what you see is the book written by Shivaji's son, Chatrapati Shivaji. He writes a book called Buddha Bhushanam, in which he collects various aphorisms from the Puranas, which he's doing it as to create the policy of his state. What it means is there is such a huge consciousness that you do not rule by the whims and fancies of your mind, and what you have to rule is by a Rajadharma, and this Rajadharma is found in our Vedas and our Itihasas and our Puranas, in Sukaranitis, in the various Arthashastras. And Buddha Bhushana means what he has compiled. And these guys were highly educated in Sanskrit, so they read all this. The Ajna Patra is written a bit later on I think request by Shahuraje. Ajna Patra is written by Ramchandra Amatya, who was Peshwa in Shiva when Shivaji was alive. And this is a massive document where he writes about every detailed policy of Shivaji. What it means is that they were very, very conscious of the policy making and the basics of policy making and its rootedness in Hindu culture and the Vedas polity, right?
This is
this is a fantastic book.
Yeah,
right.
This is the culmination, the climax of our talk. See, this is what is so great about Shivaji. He was not in it for personal power. He was not in it for personal enrichment. He was inspired and committed to reviving Hindawi Swaraj, all the basics of what our culture is, and that's shown by his actions. That's shown that he set up he set up the Ashtapradhan. He set up the governance according to the Shastras. He did everything possible to revive Hindu culture. He did everything as taking as Raj Dharma. He was not a Raja. He was just a person who was given the responsibility of administrating.
Yeah.
I think that's his. That is.
And Ajna Patra is a fantastic document which really tells in huge detail what is done. So it's out of our. It will take a huge time, but that's if anybody wants to read it, that's a thing to read. So,
yeah.
So that's the
Thanks,
end of.
Swapnil, thanks a lot. This was really an eye opener. It's a fantastic amount of knowledge, although it seems like a long time, but we've only touched the surface. That people can go read the books that Swapnil has shown up here, and surprisingly, you will find a lot of these books were written in the 19th and 20th centuries by people that studied under the British, but were not encouraged by the British. So these people, what's the word? Did it for nothing.
For nothing. Literally, they spend their lifetimes earning nothing. They didn't earn a single
unpaid commitment, unpaid work, because the subject is so inspires that kind of commitment. Shivaji and inspired that kind of feeling and the respect and the love for Hindavi Swaraj, which you can see was carried on by his successors and by not just by his children, but every one of the rulers who were influenced by him. And into the modern. Only unfortunately, I think in the last 50, 70 years, this has been lost, and mainly because we were not taught about this. If you and I were taught like this in school, I would be a very different person today.
Yeah. So true.
Okay, so let's see if there are any questions. We'll see. Otherwise, okay. Right, so Swapnil, here's a question from Trupti Kadam. So she says, formation of the states on linguistic basis seems to have divided Hindus. The politics post-independence has further worsened that. How to revert that? Yes, sharing all these facts is a way.
Right. That's very well put.
Yeah, correct.
Sorry, are you getting it?
No, finish. It's Trupti has made a comment and also sort of answered. Question is, how do we revert all this division?
I think one way to do it is at an individual level, where we consider that while our regional language is our Matru Bhasha or mother tongue, as we call it, right? We consider Sanskrit as our Pitru Bhasha, right? That is where everything comes from. And once we consider Sanskrit as our Pitru Bhasha, then next step we can go and learn one language which is completely different. For example, learn Telugu if you're or a Marathi. I remember Pula Deshpande. He went to Shantiniketan and learned Bengali because he said, I want to read Rabindranath Tagore's poetry in their Bengali original. नहीं तो उसका स्वाद कैसे आएगा, right? So we are a multilingual society, and sadly, the linguistic division of states seems to have made us into this fake three language thing where you have English and Hindi and some local language and no other Indian language, which is a huge problem. We should be learning some other Indian language also.
Yeah, which is this linguistic division is basically a European concept imposed upon us. And as Trupti says correctly, sharing these facts, it's a form of education, educating people about our history and our the heritage or the culture of governance, how the Raj Dharma that Shivaji wanted to practice. That education, it will change things.
Yes.
Trupti, I think the politicians today should take a leaf and start changing the education right from the primary level, completely reevaluating the education system. Not what Modi has done recently, but Sandeep, hello. Okay, question from Sandeep. As per me, I'll read out the question, Swapnil. As per me, when Bharat is a secular country, government of India does not have any right to control and take money from the temples. Am I correct?
Absolutely, completely agree. In fact, we should go back to the old model where certain resources are dedicated to the temple, and not even the king, not even the government has a right to interfere in that area. So we have this scenario where if you see the Venkateshwara, Tirupati and all, where you will see kings changed, Mahavani Sultanate came and went, but the region that gives revenue to the temple always remained the same. And there is a reason why they did like that. They did like that is to keep the temple economy and the spiritual center of the Hindus completely different from what was happening in the political affairs of the nation or the state. And we should get back to that model. Government should not take anything from the temples. Whatever Hindus are donating should remain with the temple, just like what Postnatal of Nagpur did in the Jagannath Puri. All the revenue remains with the temples. We should move back to that area, and then the Hindus decide how the money should be spent. And right now, I think the tendency is to say that, well, it will be spent in this way and that way. Well, it is for the Hindu community to resolve their politics. It is not for the government to enter into temple politics with the fear of embezzlement and all that. It is for the Hindus to resolve all those issues. Anybody else has no local standing.
Sandeep, your question is very correct. You said it. You hit on the right points. Secular. India is a secular country. Now, secular means no interference of religion in governance, and it should be the vice versa also. No interference of government into religion. And the old temple economy did that. The temples were self-sufficient. They did not rely on the government giving them money. And similarly, the government could not do anything to them, could not take anything from them. And I agree with Swapnil that this should be revived. The government has no right to take anything from the temples. In fact, the government should make temples free. And in fact, government should stop giving money to any religion. That is the true meaning of secular. The government today's government is spending money on madrasas, religious education. Why? If that religion wants to educate themselves, let them raise the funds themselves. That's how we Hindus get educated. The true meaning of secular is non-involvement in the religious affairs of the people.
Absolutely.
Okay, the next question is from Amitesh Tripathi. What scenario have been changed during the last 100 years? Why today's Marathi Manush are leaving Hindu religion and converting to Buddhism? I have seen huge conversion in Nasik region. What do you say, Swapnil?
Right.
You want me to
That's
repeat the question? What has
Yeah,
changed in
I
the
got
last
the
100
question.
years?
I got the question, and I agree. I also not just Buddhism, but also into Christianity. And my analysis of this is that what has happened is that uh, by stopping education of Hinduism in our traditional area, by having dehumanization of Hindu icons, deities, philosophies in the media, uh, and abandoning the philosophical aspects of our religion, uh, an opening has been created for many of the proselytizing religions. So, for example, we need to have dhyana workshops everywhere. We need to have yoga, who does not just teach asanas and little pranayam. I mean, all that is fine, but we need Ramdev Babas everywhere. If you are not teaching the spiritual aspects of yoga, if you are not teaching Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, I don't believe you are doing anything related to yoga. I'm sorry, you might be a great contortionist, but it is not yoga. So we have distorted all our legacy, and it is time to get philosophy back, right? We need to get, for example, Madhavacharya's criticism of the various Shad We need to get Adi Shankaracharya's writings on Buddhism, for example. We need to get that into mainstream, convert it into mainstream media, have sessions like this where people can understand Hinduism. Right now, people think गणपति की पूजा की, शंकर की पूजा की, मंदिर गए, यही हिंदुइज्म हो गया. That's a huge problem.
So I think Amitesh, what Swapnil is saying is very very true. We have lost contact with our philosophical roots, with our cultural roots. ये जड़ से उखाड़ दे. Our For the last 100 years, our roots have been weakened. Fortunately, not completely removed. So I would add to that as a practical person, practical answer is that what we need to do is reintroduce. We need to change the education system. If we started educating Hindus from a young age in the Hindu culture, within one generation, within 20 years, we would not have this problem. Okay, next one is from Tanvi Ravarane. What is the distinct feature of Maratha polity in contrast to other governance models which made them rise to power?
Okay,
That's
so
interesting question.
right. So there is a very good contrast that Jaiswal makes with the Sikh polity. So this is not to say that the Sikhs were not brave. In fact, Jaiswal mentioned that Guru Gobind Singh tried to get back to the Hindu polity, but his life was cut short. Uh, the huge feature was access to the Shastras at that time. Right? So if you see at that time, the advisors to all the Maratha Sardars, not just the Maratha Sardar, but even Adil Shahi and Qutub Shahi and Nizam Shahi at that time, they were all the Brahmins and the CKPs and the Kshatriya who had access to education at that time of the Arthashastra kind. I'm not saying that the other Jatis did not have access to education, but these had access to education of the politics kind. And they used to study the Puranas and the Mahabharata and Ramayana. What is taught to Ramayana in our TVs, we never cover, for example, Vidurniti. We never cover the Shanti Parva Updesh by Bhishma to Yudhishthir, where Bhishma actually covers the different kind of governments. This you will never see in a TV serial. But this is the real marma or the essence of Mahabharata and Ramayana. Uh, this 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 polity somehow retained all that, and that was usually responsible for a lot of their success. The other reason was of course the Shastra. where they learned the art of guerrilla warfare. So, to give a very quick history, that when Alauddin Khilji came and attacked, what were called Marathas or Maharathas at that time were farmers, artisans, right? All these people. They were not really from a common people army. I'm talking about, right? They were these, and over time, because the southern area continent of India did not have access like Mughals to importing warriors which are Irani, Afghani, Turkic, which the Mughals did to a large extent. The southern continent did not have that access, and whenever they got the local people who were converted to Islam, they used to hate them. So the southern sultanates were forced to recruit Maratha into the fighting cadre, which is what happened from 1300 to about 1600, 1650. So they got into military warfare, and as they got into military warfare, they got a lot of the skills. For example, Shahaji Bhosle learned from Malik Ambar a lot of things about Gamini Kawa, or guerrilla warfare as we call it. Right, the politics that Shahaji played and Shivaji played, it's highly complicated politics. You cannot just have it as a genius. It has to be learned as a system, and they learned it as a system to then implement it. And all that system learning was, for example, by the Moropanta Pingres, and all these people who came with that knowledge.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Swapnil. The what I would add to that, Tanvi, is or what I would summarize it as basically when the Islamists came to India, they had a lot more success in northern India. In northern India, they almost eliminated the ruling classes, where the knowledge of our Shastras was embedded. So, fortunately, in the southern and the Shivaji's area and southern part, the knowledge of the Shastras was maintained and passed on, and Shivaji was tutored in this. And the reason why the Marathas could rise to power was because they based their entire polity on the Shastras. There was no one else in India at the time who was doing that, and I'm guessing that that's what attracted other Hindus, other Rathas, to cooperate and to help the Marathas, and because they could feel that this is our root.
Yeah.
So it's the fact that they relied on went back to the Shastras, as Shivaji consciously looked into the Brahmanas and the Vedas and the Arthashastras to ways of how to govern and how to establish his kingdoms.
Yeah.
Right? So,
If you can just add one nitty-gritty detail, and because sometimes people like details, so just one example. I advise to read Ajna Patra, which is freely available. But one thing that Shivaji did is that he removed the hereditary system of Watandars. So, but he did not do it suddenly. His implementation was very gradual. So, what he did was the Watandars had grown extremely powerful because they had both the revenue of the region, as well as they were literally the monopolistic dictators of the Watan that was given to them, right? So Shivaji gradually removed this and made this separation between financial and military power. So he said the military power will remain with the state. You can continue to collect the revenue from the Watans you have, right? But the administration of that will be done by me. It will not be done by you. It will be done by a central military force. So these are all subtle changes, and Ajna Patra is full of all these changes. So,
by the way, the word Ajna Patra, for those may not know, it's probably the same in my Hindi. It literally means the letter of the order, right? Ajna, Rajasi Ajna. Okay, here's another question or comment from Srinivasulu Grandi. Could you throw some light upon the Maratha-Mysore War?
So I think my Maratha-Mysore War, you mean the war against Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan that happened. So I'm not an expert on that, and I'm aware a lot of politics happened at that time when the French and the British were also involved. So I would have been very happy to do that, but I'm not really
So,
that detailed student of.
to your knowledge, Swapnil, I'm wondering whether Srinivasulu is thinking of the Maratha Mysore War as something between the Shivaji or the Peshwas in 1791. So, it would be the Peshwa.
Absolutely. Right. That's
Was
what
it
it's
against?
talking.
Would it be against some Hindu king of Mysore, or was it against the Adil Shahi or Nizam Shahi?
It was with the at that time the Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. That was the conflict with
Okay.
them.
So,
And it was a territorial conflict, and there were British involved, and British were involved on the Maratha side also. So finally, when Tipu Sultan was defeated, he was defeated with a joint force of Marathas and the British.
So
But
for
I'm
our
a detailed student on this. I'm not an authority on that.
for our discussion, Srinivasulu, this is it fits in with the history discussed that the Shivaji and the Marathas did not take over Hindu kingdoms, but they fought any foreign power that was trying to establish a foreign system in India, in Bharat. So that war would be against the foreign system. Okay, this is a question from Sudin Kadam. Is Hindavi Swarajya same as Hindu Rashtra? If yes, we have a perfect example of Hindu Rashtra looks like in the advocacy to establish it again. What do you say? So,
Yes,
is Hindavi Swaraj the same as Hindu Rashtra?
I would say yes, because embedded in Hindu Swarajya is a little sense that we are being ruled by someone else, hence Swarajya. Hindu Rashtra kind of embodies that, okay, so now we are free, and now we establish and rule and govern ourselves based on a political theory that we have, which is suitable for our culture, our values, preserving the legacies that we have, not throwing them out with, and just accepting what is told to us as secular, but is actually Christian political theory, whether it is class theory, whether it is social contract theory. So all these are basically Western theories born out of social conflicts and clashes and frictions, which have been a legacy of Europe. Why should we adopt them? Because they had some fight. It is so silly that right? It's just silly.
Sorry. My answer to that would be very simple and straightforward. So then, is Hindavi Swarajya the same as Hindu Rashtra? I think exactly yes. Absolutely yes, because Hindavi Swarajya was Shivaji's word, but today Hindu Rashtra means exactly the same thing. We need a system of governance that is based on Hindu culture, based on our Shastras. And you are right that the perfect example of that is to advocate it is to look at how Shivaji governed, and let that be the model. Okay, here's a question from Nakul Gote. Thanks for the excellent discussion. Thank you for watching, Nakul. Is democracy good enough as a framework for the flourishing of a pluralistic society, which Hindu society is? What are the lacunae which a Hindu Rashtra could fill? Can I say something first before you do that? So, Nakul, your question is a very good question, excellent question. And right away, you have hit the nail on the head. Is democracy a good enough framework? Democracy is absolutely not the right framework. In fact, we have been blinded to our frameworks. The frameworks discussed in our Shastras are, in my opinion, far superior to democracy. As Churchill has famously said, as democracy is the worst form of governance there is, except for all the others. That's what Churchill said. And I've always personally felt that democracy is ruled by the mob, ruled by the lowest common denominator, and which is not the right way. And historically speaking, democracies have never survived long in the West also. But here we have Churchill did not know, and the West Europeans do not know. Here we have in our Aitreya Brahmanas and in our Shastras uh, examples of various frameworks for governance which fit perfectly well in a pluralistic society. Shivaji's Hindavi Rashtra was a good example. The Maratha Empire was a good example. Pluralistic society underneath, and the run under a framework of Hindu Rashtra on the framework based on the Aitreya Brahmanas. Sorry, Swapnil, if I spoke before you, but this one I felt strongly about this.
I completely agree with you. I think we need to go into the word democracy and what it really means, right? Most people think that universal suffrage, which is one man, one vote, is democracy. However, even the Western origins of democracy were very different. It was never one man, one vote. That came in 1900s, right? Again, we think that democracy means everybody is voting for some issue like a plebiscite. We know that doesn't happen. We have a Rajya Sabha and a Lok Sabha. We have a Republican democracy where we send our representatives to the Lok Sabha. But Rajya Sabha, again, we don't vote for those people, right? So a lot of our representatives are very different. And then why do you need these two houses then? Right? So when we say democracy, we kind of glorify the word democracy without getting into the nitty-gritties of how it really operates. So the question is, should the decision to go to war or not go to war also be dependent on, let's say, a phone? You vote like a plebiscite on a mobile phone,
or a referendum.
right? Like in the referendum, should our economic policies also be based on on such a referendum, like we have in a lot of science fiction, Isaac Asimov novels, where he kind of alludes to that as a science fiction event. So we need to we have unnecessarily glorified the word democracy, and it gives us an escape to really discuss the political structure, decision-making structure, representative structure, authority structure. Right? It's like free markets, right? Everybody's free markets, sab kuch chalega. But the reality is there is never a complete free market. There are regulations, there are monopolies. So there is nothing like a free market. It's everything is not free market.
Our Shastras, as you explained in the earlier slides, there were different forms of governance mentioned in the Shastras. There are different gunas and Ganarajyas, the different constitutions, and democracy was part of that. There were many small kingdoms there where the common people did have a significant say in how it was run, and the way our Hindavi frameworks work is far superior to the simple, very primitive kind of thinking which is democracy. The Western idea of democracy, one man, one vote, is very primitive. It's actually impractical, and there's no depth to it. So I think for India, for Bharat going forward, the first thing should be we go back to our roots, look into our Shastras, and learn what the knowledge we have. We have everything there required for us to govern ourselves in the right way. We are a pluralistic society. We have respect for each other and respect, tolerance for everyone, and we should know how to govern ourselves.
Absolutely.
So
And we can use modern technology for all this. For example, universal suffrage today is not possible without a paper voting and a ballot counting system. So technology enables that. In India, we have EVMs for universal suffrage. So we can use modern technology, but for philosophy, we need to go back and study and look at our existing models, develop them further. So
Swapnil, might be a good idea for a future topic. If we could sort of imagine a Hindu Rashtra based on the model or framework of Hindawi Swaraj of Shivaji. So we can imagine how a modern Hindu Rashtra might look if it based on our Shastras, totally based on our Shastras. And of course, we take what is good from the rest of the world, but it should be suitable for our pluralistic society. And I believe we have that already in our Shastras. Might be a good discussion to have how it might look.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You were great, Eddie.
All right. So that was the last comment. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you for joining us in today's discussion. It's gone on fairly long, but I hope it was interesting and enlightening. It was very enlightening for me. And thank you, Swapnil, for sharing your vast knowledge with us.
Thank you so much, Pandurang, and for all the queries and organizing. And thank you so much for the audience questions and patience over and of the time. So thank you.
And thank you and a big thumbs up to IIT Bombay for Bharat. You're doing great work, you guys, and I hope you go from strength to strength and we spread the Hindavi consciousness throughout our country with your efforts. Thank you.